Geology, geology, geology. Welcome to Mini Geology, where we put in connection geology with society at large. I am Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist. Today, we'll talk about the unemployment of geologists. For this, we'll have a conversation with Stefano Mazzoni, a fellow geologist living in Houston, a longtime friend of Mini Geology. And he prepared a list of hard truths about job hunting and networking derived from his own experience. And we know that last year, 2020, has been an extraordinary difficult year. And several people in our geological community have lost their job or are presently at risk. Now, I would like to share some experience from colleagues that have already gone through these challenging times. And that's the reason why today with us, Stefano Mazzoni. So Stefano, welcome to Mini Geology.
Thank you, Daniel.
Such a pleasure to have you in here with us, Stefano. You always support the cause of Mini Geology. Really great to have you in here, helping the community. And we're gonna try to do this show to help the geological community around the city where we live in Houston and maybe Texas, but I'm sure that what you'll say is gonna be applicable for many geologists that are unemployed right now. Isn't that true?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the things that are in here are applicable. Some of them are a little more focused towards petroleum geoscience or extractive industries, which have a more cyclical nature to them of boom and bust. And so some of these tips are maybe used a little more readily or more often by people in our industry, of yours and mine. But in general, they're, I think, things that can apply to other locations and other sub-disciplines of geoscience and other work as well.
So Stefano, help us to put in context this list of hard truths about job hunting. In other words, why do you have experience in this topic?
You know, through my own experience, I've changed jobs several times. Sometimes that's been by my own choosing. Sometimes that's been by my employer's choosing. And so I've learned some things while in jobs and while in between jobs that I think could help other people and have helped other people from a kind of a one-on-one mentoring type of roles where people have reached out when they've lost a job or when they're considering a job move and said, how did you go through this? What was your process and how did you approach this?
Yeah. This is within United States, right?
Correct. Yeah, I've only been based within the United States. I've traveled to other countries for work, but all of my employment has been US based. That's correct.
All right. So Stefano, let us know a little bit about you and your mindset when you approached this problem.
Sure. I mean, and actually that probably transitions well in maybe the first point, which is don't define your self-worth by your job, which is to say, be comfortable and be confident in what you're doing and who you are. And what happens with, a lot of companies will do things on an annual basis of some kind of a ranking or a grading system. Different personalities of people can internalize that differently. I guess I'm a little more laid back about my approach to the job and to the internalization of what the job is for me. This is where I am now. I may not have been like this 15 years ago, but after seeing experiences of booms and busts and people coming and people going, that's one thing that I've learned is everything in your life is not defined by your title, basically, right?
So Stefano, can I summarize the first of these 10 points as do not define your self-worth by your job?
Correct. That's the first half. Now the flip side to that is to the other clause in that sentence is do ensure your family security, your personal and family, if you have one, security, which is that because there is this boom and bust cycle, a thing that's very important is to always make sure that you're in a place that if there is a layoff or if there are cuts, that you have some kind of living budget, liquid assets that you can live on for 3 months, 6 months, depending on the economy. If it's a normal time, then a 3 month is fine. If we're dealing with what we're dealing with now, it's good to have a little more saved up.
Does it imply, Stefano, that people they don't even put aside 3 months of salary for special cases?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that's surprising to me is that the reason that this is something that needs to be learned is that this is, again, speaking to a smaller subset of society, which is that we are making more than enough to live on because we're paid, our job stability is tied to a commodity price. So because of that, there are people who, really are living paycheck to paycheck and cannot put money away in a sustainable manner. And that's not who we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are making, enough money to be able to ensure that they're putting away, some percentage. And that's why I just said, living budget. And that can be different for everybody. If you're just starting out in the industry, then maybe you're putting away, a smaller dollar amount. But if you have more experience and more family needs and more other of everything else, then make sure that you've got a larger sum of money put away in some kind of a liquid asset.
All right, point number 2.
So point number 2 is, it reads, every job is a continuous two-way interview. This is really important because I feel that people are constantly judged by their employer in terms of their job performance. And again, this is coming from a period when there are options out there that you always need to keep an eye out of what's going on with you at that job. And if you're comfortable being there and working for that employer and that's going well, then you're fine, right? But if something happens that you're not comfortable working there anymore, or something else comes around that's more attractive to what you want to do, you are constantly interviewing your employer for, do you want to work for them? They're always looking at you of, are you good enough to work for us? And we look at them as, do I want to keep working for this company? This is where, again, sort of the employment law can change, but in the US, most of the full-time positions that geologists are employed in they're employed on an at-will basis, which means that an employer can terminate you basically whenever they choose. They don't need to wait until a contract period or something like that expires. Full-time employment is good because it can give you, benefits, insurance, health insurance, company stock, all that, but it doesn't really guarantee long-term stability. One of my bosses told me that, every job is a month-to-month contract. Even if you have a long-term employment agreement.
So in here, you're also kind of suggesting to elevate ourselves at the same level of the employer.
Absolutely.
And the employee, they should be at the same level. And so this is also a matter maybe of dignity.
It's a matter of dignity. It's a matter of self-respect and mutual respect situation.
So point number 2, every job is a continuous two-way interview. What is next?
Number 3, I have keep your skills relevant and continuously improve on them. So this is something important to basically not get into a job. And once we go through a lot of training in university and graduate school, and then in some companies, some of the larger companies have formal or training programs of some kind. And a lot of people who are newly hired will get a lot of training and experience, but then that starts to tail away. And the important thing is to keep this going, either through some kind of formalized training through a company or a professional organization, or informal training that can be done, through peer-to-peer training or through online course or something like that. That also plays into attending professional society meetings. That's a great place to get training and also networking, which we'll touch on later. This is something I learned kind of later on, which is to the value of having professional certifications or licenses in whatever your field is. In geology, we've got the PG, the professional geologist certification. Then if you're doing project management, even if you're a geologist or a geoscientist or a petrophysicist, you may be in charge of a group of people as you advance in your career. And so looking at something like the PMP, the Project Management Professional Certification, is a good way to show, the next employer that you've had this on the job training, but then kind of solidified it with a formal certification. There's other things like certifications in technology or software that you can achieve either through on-site support from a vendor or through attending some kind of a online or when there were in-person sessions. And what I wanted to stress to do this is do this while you're working, because you may have educational benefits provided to you from your employer where they may pay for these courses. And also the flip side of that is if you're unemployed and you don't have any income, and it doesn't look very attractive to go pay for a $500 or $1,000 course, which may or may not help you get the next job. It's not a guarantee. That's something that your employer may or may not pay for it, but at least you have a stable source of income that you can use. You can make that investment a lot more comfortably.
It is
And
difficult though to when you are work for an employer to take a course and having that mindset to absorb it because maybe you will need it in the future.
you're leading into my next statement perfectly, which is that what's important about these courses is that you may take some course, and then even if it's not applicable in the current job that you're working, you can seek out personnel resources like experts that are familiar with that, whatever you've just taken a course in, and then also equipment resources, whether that be computing and software licenses, things like that. So if you take, like if I were to take a software course right now for something that I may use in another job, I can use that piece of software while I'm in the course for the day or week or whatever the course is, but then I don't have a license to practice with it right away. And so, again, this comes with, you always have to balance your regular job duties, but if you've taken a course and when you're finished with that course, as long as you get your regular job duties done, take the time while you're in an organization that may have that software for you to practice with, or may have that, deep water stratigraphy expert that you took a class in from a vendor, from a professional society or something, but then you can go get some continued mentorship.
So this point 3, keep your skills relevant and continuously improve them. Is it more for people that they are at risk and they still have a job, or for those that are unemployed?
I would say it's for everybody. And even if you're employed and not at risk, at some point you may be. And so it's always good to keep these skills up to date while employed. And then for those who are unemployed, there's a lot of good discounted or free resources out there for training. You can do everything from something like a Coursera, which you pay a nominal amount to show a certificate of completion to prove that you've taken this course, which is great. Or you can just do it on your own and look up videos on YouTube, or find a textbook and read through it and do some exercises on your own.
So point number 3 was keep your skills relevant. And point number 4.
So point number 4 is to broadly demonstrate your skills and share your expertise with others. And this point is basically talking about actively volunteering. So this can be in professional organizations or community service. And I think in both types of volunteering activities, you really get a lot of value for the time that you put in. Now, you may not see it right away, but in the long run, you get lots of professional networking, of course. You get lots of leadership opportunities. For example, if you would like some kind of leadership opportunity in some kind of technical or managerial role, you may not be given that by your employer for whatever reason.
And they're going to be very happy that you
Oh yeah,
volunteer and take those responsibilities.
big time. Yeah. That's important to. I mean, there's multiple facets to the importance of this. I think, just from an altruistic perspective, from a giving back perspective, there's a lot of these organizations provide a lot of important, scholarships and outreach and training and things like that, and pipeline people into the geosciences or into whatever discipline we're talking about here. And so it's important to give back to them. because the people who were giving out those scholarships and going out and fundraising for those scholarships are the roles that you would have to fill, once you're in a situation to do so. So yeah, there's a lot of important things that you learn there. I've listed things like time management, organizing events. I organize lots of field trips for professional societies. Conflict resolution. There's times when you're on a committee and somebody's being difficult, and you can work it out and learn how to work it out and watch how those things play out without necessarily impacting your day job, so to speak, but their job skills, they're skills that you learn that you can bring back to your job afterwards. Basic things like developing a budget for business planning, for example, you can bring back to your office. Influencing others, trying to understand other people's motivations and see how you can influence them to come together to develop, whether it be a training program or a field trip.
So it looks like the potential association could be a natural lab where you can experiment many things that
Correct.
sometimes you don't have the chance to experiment under your own employer.
Yeah, and that's important also from, a lot of companies have kind of career tracks, and a lot of times people will be bucketed or be siloed into, a technical career track or a managerial career track. Now, bigger organizations have, matrix setups where people can often kind of go back and forth, but that's kind of difficult. So anyways, but that being said, if you are in a technical track and you want to, like you said, kind of experiment in a natural lab like an organization, you can try out for a year some kind of a leadership role or a committee role and kind of experience it without necessarily going up a track, I don't say the wrong track, but a track that you find out 9 months into it that you don't really like that. So if you've done it it's easy to step away from a professional society for that kind of a role, and you can still help them maybe with some other committee or some other function, but it doesn't really isolate you as much as doing that in a job and then not doing very well in it or realizing you don't like it.
So point number 4, demonstrate your skills, both sharing your experience and volunteering in your local association, I would add.
Other part in there is to be a resource to those around you. That can be within within a professional society, but really that comment is targeted within a company or an organization that you're involved in professionally. Is if you've developed expertise in something, then don't just kind of hoard that to yourself. It's better for you to build that expertise and then mentor others around you so that there are other people who can work with you, and that job function, for example, may not be hypercritical in the future and 2 years down the road or 5 years down the road. And so, if you become, say, a basin expert in something, and then that company decides to move out of that basin, then you're kind of left stranded. And so it's important to have a lot of good, this all ties into networking as well. A good network out there of people that you've mentored, because when you're looking for a job, they may be in other organizations where they can bring you in. They can say, this person not only is an expert, but really shows a willingness to share their knowledge with those around. And so we all can benefit by bringing that person into our organization.
That was point number 4. Demonstrate your skills and share your expertise with others. So I bet you have here some coming points that are related to LinkedIn. Let us know about them.
Yeah, so the next 3 are basically, well, one is the first one is LinkedIn adjacent, but then the 2 after that really are focused on LinkedIn. But the first one, which is point number 5, is to always keep your resume, and by corollary your LinkedIn profile, which is becoming sort of a resume in many respects. Always keep it up to date, and also keep it flexible for any use. That's kind of the point on the resume. So what happens is a lot of people will, find a good stable job with a good stable organization, and then find themselves, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, never having updated their resume. And of course, they're gaining super important, job skills and experiences and things like that along the way that they're not keeping track of. And so to go back and try to remember it all is challenging. You know, how much oil did we add in this reserve booking that we did, 13 years ago, and that's difficult. So I always tell people to keep the resume up to date, whether you think you're going to need it or not. I recommend people check it every 3 to 6 months is probably good, because you can easily kind of remember what happened. A lot of times companies will have these formalized evaluation cycles, and so there are documents produced from that, so you can use those as guidelines, especially if you're going back and rebuilding a resume from that. The thing that's important is to focus on your skills that you have, not necessarily I did this job and I did this job. What skills did you develop in those jobs, and what measurable results or impacts did you generate?
So this was point 5. Always keep your resume updated.
Yeah, and the last part about what I said, flexible for any use. One thing is that right now, you open the show with talking about a lot of the energy transition, and there are a lot of skills that are applicable to things outside of your discipline. For example, petroleum geologists looking at new sectors outside of just petroleum geoscience. And so one thing that the skills thing focuses on is, there are lots and lots of transferable skills in there. But what I tend to do is I keep kind of a long running resume that's probably 6 or 7 pages long, where I have, detailed descriptions of all the jobs that I've worked and things that I've done. And then if I'm applying to a job that maybe they don't care about the fact that I've worked this area or that area, but they know that I know how to do another particular skill set, then I'll make a tailor-made resume from that, a 1 or a 2-page resume from that longer one. The next point, now we're getting into 2 kind of more LinkedIn specific the ones, which is, LinkedIn has this function of giving recommendations and requesting recommendations. And one thing that I recommend that people do is to make it a common practice to ask for and give recommendations at the end of any particular job, whether that's transferring groups within an organization or actually transferring jobs, changing organizations. And I think that's important for 2 reasons. One is that it shows that you're proactive in seeking feedback. So let's just fast forward this 10 years down the road where you're looking for a job. And if I'm a hiring manager and I'm looking at your resume, I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I notice that you have no recommendations and then like 10 in a 10-day period, that tells me that you weren't, actively seeking feedback on your performance. And you may have been doing that in a private setting, which is fine. But to put it out there publicly is useful as well, where you can show that you have 2 recommendations after you've left this job, and then you have 3 after leaving this job, and they're spaced out over that 10-year period. To me, tells me that you're actively, like I said, seeking feedback and putting it to use. And the other part of that is it helps keep things fresh, both in the person that you're asking for the recommendation from, in terms of, they're not going back 10 years to a job you did with them then, and it helps you write a recommendation for somebody that you've recently worked with. So I think that's just something that I recommend people do. And part of that is, give recommendations for people, even if they're not going to write one for you. There are lots of recommendations I've written for people, not expecting them to write one back for me, because we may have worked together, but maybe I saw more of their work than they saw more of mine, or things like that can happen. So it's important to be, generous with them and patient with the process. So.
Is this aspect something that based on your experience that it works, or somebody maybe told you?
It works for me, or it works for me in the sense that as a hiring manager, if I'm looking at some potential people and somebody has a lot of really good recommendations, and the recommendations obviously can be highly variable in terms of the content. Some people write them really short and just kind of pretty canned language, but if it's specific as to here are some specific things that this person excels in, and if that strikes me as the type of person that is what we need in the job that we're doing, then I think it's more valuable. And I mean, this goes back, well, our history with Santa Cruz, right? So we had narrative evaluations there. And for example, so we had the option to request grades if we wanted letter grades, but we also had narrative evaluations, which were, really similar to the length of LinkedIn recommendations. Those were really helpful because I took some courses where, I did really well in some aspect and I did poorly in another aspect. And when my grade was in the middle, it was explained, and I was like, and it was kind of rationalized and explained. So I think it provides a lot of context. Now, I don't know how much other people use them, but that's just my recommendation.
So point number 6, ask for and give LinkedIn recommendations.
Yeah.
And next point.
So the next point is, this is also LinkedIn specific, but choose a strategy for your LinkedIn connections and curate them constantly. And so what I mean by this is there are different approaches. There are some people that will put on their LinkedIn profile Open Networker, or I think they used an acronym LION, which was like LinkedIn Open Network. And so these were people that if you sent them a connection request, they would immediately accept. And the point of that was to build a really, really, really broad network. And obviously there are some deep connections in there, but was to have a broad network. Different strategy than I use, but it's a good strategy in the sense that they're really good at building bridges. The flip side of that is that they may or may not necessarily know any of those people. So your strategy may want to be the other side of that spectrum, which is only people that you've worked with and know very well and can vouch for them and their ability. So you may only have 50 people in your network or 100 people in your network. And that's fine too, because I know that if somebody's doing that kind of strategy, if I ask them, hey, what did you think of this person? And do you think they would be good for this job? They know them very well. That's kind of the perspective in terms of the two end members. My personal strategy is kind of somewhere in between. I try to keep most of my connections, probably 90% of them, as people that I've known, that I know, that I've worked with, that I've gone to a course with, that I've had a meal with, or worked with in a professional or personal setting. But then also keep another percentage of people who are well connected or have a network different than mine, and so can help me, I don't say open doors, but help build bridges. And then it's up to me to cross that bridge, but into another industry or into another sector or into another discipline, subdiscipline, or geographic location. That's the strategy that I use, is that I tend to keep my circle pretty limited, because if people come to me and say, hey, did you know this person and what do you think? There's a good chance that I can give them some kind of information. I may not have worked with them really closely. Those kinds of people are in my recommendations, on my LinkedIn recommendations, people that I've written recommendations for, but other people I know as well.
So point number 7 is to choose your strategy on who to connect with in LinkedIn. What about point number 8?
So point number 8 is kind of, we've been building into networking and through several of these points, but this one's really specific on networking, which is that, networking only works if you're the one who puts in the continuous effort. It's not something that you turn on and off kind of when you need a job or when you need somebody to help you. It's an active effort of reaching out and helping other people. It's not like I said, a quick thing that, okay, got laid off, let me start networking now so that I can find a job. It's like, no. You're networking all throughout your time and building these kind of long-term relationships for the future. The connections that you make while employed or the connections that you make while looking for a job may not be the ones that help you right then and there, but may be giving you a job, 6 months down the road or 2 years, 3 years down the road.
What do you really mean by networking? How do you network? What are the real actions that you do to do this?
That's a good question, and that's a broad question. I mean, there's a broad answer, I guess. It's a specific question with a very broad answer, and I think a lot of that depends on people's personal style. It depends on the venue that we are afforded, whether that be at a professional society meeting or whether that be at a community meeting, that you're going into a new school, for example, for your child, and you're meeting some new people and you're building your network on a personal level, or you're building a professional network. A lot of the approaches are similar. And also, and this takes there's another aspect of this broad answer, which is, dealing with everything now in a post-COVID world, which in some ways networking is more challenging, in other ways it's more simple. Right now, it's a lot easier for me to mentor somebody who isn't in the United States than it was a year ago. But I also can't, sit down and have a beer with that person like we could a year ago, right? So and we don't have these big society meetings in person like we did, a year or two ago. So the format is highly dependent on your situation, both where you live and what the world is like around you and globally, but also from your personal approach. So I tend to do my networking through a lot of technical components. People with a similar discipline and interest there are easy natural starts to the conversation, but also just from a personal perspective, keeping that network broad and looking for people who are in a different location, in a different situation than you are, in a different career stage than you are. And mentoring is also part of this as well. Obviously, that's a different form of networking. It's a really important form of networking. It's a really powerful form of networking. And that also is really different too, right? I mean, we can talk, and I think you've already talked to people about mentoring. There's different avenues of doing that, where it's a formal, rigorous type of approach, or a very informal setting where you can reach out to people to mentor them, or they can reach out to you to mentor you. And I think networking is really similar as well. I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, I really want to kind of build a relationship, which is basically what networking is, right? It's not like, let's connect on LinkedIn and then we're done, right? And that's where, I mentioned, actually the end of that last point was, curate your connections, right? Keep up with people, see what they're doing. And that's all part of networking. It's, it's a daily or at least a weekly type of thing.
So point number 8, networking only works if you continuously put in the effort. Last couple of points.
So the second to last one is to always be looking for the next job or jobs that you want. So this basically says, be aware of what opportunities are around you and out there. Keep an eye on the market, keep an eye on both your sector, whether that be your industry or your technical discipline, and also be aware of what else is out there. If you're looking for some kind of a job change, whether that be, like I said, sector or technical, be aware of what else, how the market looks out there right now. If you want to go into mining right now, like, what does the mining industry look like? What are you doing to learn about it? What networks are you building for that? Really, the point of that is to have that in your head, even when you are employed, whether you're at risk, like you said, or not, just to kind of know what's out there, know what's going on, so that if you do find yourself out of a job, you have a head start on where to go and what to do. I think, I've talked to some people recently that have said some really important points, which is that if you are laid off, especially if it's kind of a surprise to you, a lot of people will kind of take some time off from job hunting and job searching. They don't start their job search right away, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's actually a lot of really good value to that. But there's also value in kind of having those, framing exercises in your head of, what do I want to do next? Where do I want to go? How am I building towards that? Where do I want to go geographically or technically or company-wise? If there's a company that you really like what they're doing, are you building networks there? Do you know what they're posting for jobs? Sign up for notifications for their jobs, and just know what's out there, basically, is the point of that one.
So Stefano, in a way, you are also describing a situation where you continuously have a tension between your job security and the uncertainties out there, which is
Correct.
something maybe very American, isn't it?
Probably, yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is also
but that ties back into that first point of, or sorry, I guess the second point of making sure that every job is a two-way interview.
Do you think that this perpetual tension is positive or is detrimental?
Well, I think it's more positive. I think what I'm describing is kind of a fusing of kind of two generations and two approaches, which is, in I don't know exact numbers, but let's say a generation ago, to use a generic term, when you got a job with, General Motors or some big company, like you worked there for 40 years and retired, like moving jobs was not, again, I don't have the data to back this up. This is from, anecdotal evidence and stories and shared things that were shared with me. But typically that was the case, right? Where you got a job, you don't go looking for something else. You're happy with it. You put your nose down and get the job done. Now we're dealing with, fast forward to present day, where the gig economy is a thing, right? And so people are working 2 or 3 jobs at a time. They're driving for Uber while they're doing this, while they're doing that. And so it's kind of the opposite of that. So I think this is kind of a blend of the two, right? So like obviously the most important thing is to keep your job as stable as you can, if you like it. But when you start not liking it and you realize there are other options out there, then start exploring those options and seeing if it's something that you can do. So instead of going from 40 years in a company to 4 days or 4 weeks with a short-term contract, moving around every 5 to 10 years is not seen as a bad thing anymore as it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
So point number 9, always be looking for the next job you want. Point number 10.
So number 10 is, when you are in a situation that you're looking for a job, do keep your network going and help other people find jobs as well. When a lot of people are looking for jobs, one thing you can do is kind of shut yourself in and look only for yourself. But what I've seen happen, and I really like it, is that there's people who will go out of their way to post jobs, even the ones that they may be applying for. And so what you're doing is you're opening the search, to people who may take the job away from you. But if you pass a job on to somebody, a recommendation for a job that they apply, and they end up getting that job, and they're really thankful for you doing that, they may not be in a position to get you hired on right away, but they may be the person who gives you a job, 2 years down the road or 5 years down the road, because they remember the altruism and the work and the kindness that you extended to them when doing that. So I think it's a sensitive time, but it's an important time to build strong connections with your network.
And I have to disclose in here that I'm here in United States, in Texas, in Houston, because of Stefano. Stefano helped me connecting with the people that I'm working for right now and building bridges, the very first bricks of a bridge. And then I connect from there to another person. And so that's the reason
Well,
why
and
I'm here.
that's a very, that's kind of one of these anecdotes of serendipity, right? So when I was working for a big company, one of the practices that they had was when an interviewee came in, they would assign a new hire to that interviewee, and they would take them out to dinner the night before their interview and invite 4 or 5 people. And for whatever reason, I couldn't go to this one dinner, but a friend of mine said, you need to come meet this person. They're Italian, you're Italian. We met on this person's way out of the office after their interview was done. We chatted for 20, 30 minutes, mostly about soccer. And then we exchanged emails and kept in touch. And then that person ended up in the organization you're in now and doing very similar technical work. And I said, oh, you should meet this person. And then, that was born out of serendipity, because if my friend hadn't said, oh, you should meet this person who's coming in, that wouldn't have even happened too. So.
Yes, and we are in conversation with Stefano Mazzoni, a great friend of Mini Geology. This is a mini geology show. I'm Daniel Minisini, your inquisitive geologist. So thank you for the audience. Mini Geology will be here every week. You can find this interview also in the YouTube channel Mini Geology. You can write me at minigeology@gmail.com, and you'll see in the YouTube channel all the links related to these tips from and suggestions from Stefano Mazzoni. Stefano, thank you indeed. Thank you very
Thank you,
much
Daniel.
for helping the community with all of this experience that you are sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.